Hello, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to this special event sponsored by PeaceQuest and the Group of 78. My name is Roy Culpeper. I chair the Group of 78. I'd like to express a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Doug Roche, who has honored the Group of 78 on a number of occasions with his incisive arguments for peace, nuclear disarmament, and sustainable development. Doug will be talking about his very latest book, Recovery, Peace Prospects in the Biden Era. And I must say, Doug, your timing and prescience are impeccable. Congratulations. But I have to say,
thank you very much.
I have to say the election was much closer than many had hoped or predicted. So I wonder what if it had gone the other way. I dare say you would have been ready with a much more somber book for the occasion. In any event, having read your book, I strongly recommend it. It's lucid, convincing, and concise, quite readable in 2 or 3 sittings, and in harmony with the season, an ideal Christmas gift. Doug will be introduced more formally by our moderator for today, Stephen Staples of PeaceQuest. A warm welcome to you, Steve.
Thanks, Roy.
Steve is the chairperson of PeaceQuest, which was founded in 2012 in Kingston by an inspiring group of peace educators and activists committed to promoting peace through education, the arts, policy advocacy, and faithful action. Since then, it has grown to include local community groups, partners, and supporters across Canada. There's much more that I can say about Steve, but let me just add that he is the founder of the Rideau Institute, a board member of the Nobel Peace Prize winning International Peace Bureau, the world's oldest and largest peace network, and he sits on the Members' Council of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, as well as on the board of directors of the Council of Canadians, the country's largest social justice organization. Steve, thanks so much for suggesting that the G78 and PeaceQuest co-host this important launch of Doug's latest book. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Roy. And hey, on behalf of everyone at PeaceQuest, it's great to be collaborating with the Group 78 on this, and hope maybe we can do some more in the future. This is a really great time, really great opportunity, and I'm delighted to be kicking this off with Douglas Roche, a mentor of mine for more than 25 years. Doug, it's a real privilege to be with you today to talk about this, what is this, your second, third book now? Maybe fourth? 23, I think it is, 23rd book. And let me say a few words about you to everyone, just for those maybe few who don't know. Doug Roche was a progressive conservative member of Parliament for Edmonton for over a decade in the 1970s and 80s. He also served as Canada's ambassador for disarmament at the United Nations during the end of the Cold War. And later, he was a member of the Senate until they forced him to retire at 75. He was showing no signs of slowing down. And I remember, Doug, being in Ottawa in your days as the Senate, when you would use your offices and such great links with nonprofits, NGOs, and doing all kinds of fantastic peace work when you were at the Senate. I don't think it's been the same since, really. And you're the author of 22 books, as I mentioned, on peace, disarmament, and global cooperation. This is number 23, and it's supremely timely, just coming out right now, called Recovery, Prospects for Peace in the Biden Era. Doug, thank you so much for writing this book.
Well, thank you, Steve. I want to first say a word of appreciation to Roy Culpeper and his colleagues of the G78, which I have been following for their 40 years of their existence. And the Group of 78 has constantly stayed true to its original mission to bring the 3 themes of nuclear disarmament, equitable world development, and reform of the United Nations to the attention of the Government of Canada. And the contributions of the G78 to the development of policy in Canada have been outstanding. So I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to say a word about my book, which actually just arrived at my own residence yesterday. So it's a book that expresses some realistic hope.
Oh, I want to mention that because I think I was spending my Monday reading my Hill Times like I always do, and this full-page review was published in the Hill Times by Jim Kresge of your book. It says, in his new book, Roche offers recovery for a wounded world in the new Biden era. And Doug, you've met Joe Biden. I mean, you've met him. And there's a photo on the poster for the publicity. Tell me about, what were your impressions when you met Joe Biden? Tell me about that.
Yes, in 2001, the Global Security Institute in the United States invited me to speak at a conference on the implications of missile defense on the development of offensive nuclear weapons. In other words, making the nuclear arms race worse. And at the reception for the dinner opening the conference, Senator Joe Biden of Delaware was present as main speaker. And I was introduced to him as a fellow senator. I was then in the Canadian Senate. So he greeted me warmly, and he gave his speech and it was a very interesting speech that he gave on that occasion, which was only a month or so after the 9/11 attacks, and everybody was extremely upset about the potential growth of terrorism. And he used that occasion to talk about the need to strengthen cooperation between the United States and Russia and to repair their relations. So already I could see that the reaching out to others that is a characteristic of Biden's personality. Well, life went on, and years rolled by. And this summer, my friend Jonathan Granoff was going through his photos, his personal photo library, and he uncovered this photo of that Biden and myself that had been taken at that reception in 2001. So he sent the photo to me, and he said, Doug, why don't you think about this photo? And so I looked at it, and I said, well, I'm going to start to think about this. So I started to go into the research for Biden's positions over the years. I had not been terribly happy with him. He voted for the Iraq War, but on the other hand, Hillary Clinton also voted for the Iraq War. And I had not held that against her when she ran in 2016. So I sat down and I started to think about this. And I said, well, I'm not going to hold his vote against him now when he's seeking the presidency. He's gone through a whole lot of things like all the rest of us. And he apologized for that vote. He said in later years that he knew it was wrong. But he probably, like many of us, grew out of his own errors and mistakes. He learned. And so he became quite deeply involved in expressing multilateralism and reaching out for cooperation. And as I said, with the US-Russia tensions prevailing through the years, this became a characteristic of the man. And I looked into what his positions were on the agenda for peace. The agenda for peace is fairly wide, but it has four main pillars to it: economic and social development, environmental protection and climate change, arms control and disarmament, and the advancement of human rights. Those are the four themes that I've been writing about for a lot of years. And the more I got into the research of what his positions were, what he had said and what he had done, and particularly the positions he expressed as part of the Obama administration when he was vice president for 8 years, I began to become impressed with the qualities that he has been showing. And I ended up, sort of describing him in the final chapter. I described him as an ameliorator, That is one who reaches out and tries to pull together discordant elements in a moderate kind of way. And that, of course, is precisely what is needed now in this age of supreme discordancy that we're going through. So one thing led to another, and I settled down over the summer, and I started to write the book from the perspective of what Biden would bring, not just to the United States, but bring to the world in virtue of being the United States president, and thus a driver of the world agenda. There's no getting around the fact that the United States is a driver of the world agenda. So the more I got into it, the more I liked what he was representing and the plans he was putting out. Not least a $2 trillion plan to escalate the use of clean energy in the transportation, electricity, and building sectors to respond to the crisis of the economy and climate change. And so as I was writing, I felt my own spirits rising. That is to say, we are engulfed. We have been engulfed for 4 years, and particularly egregiously so in the past couple of months, on Trump and the megalomaniac qualities that Trump is espousing and trying to upset the very architecture of democracy in the United States. It is so repulsive that one can hardly find the words to talk about it.
I want to ask you about that, Doug, because I think you've done us a huge service. We need, Biden. We hardly know the guy. The campaign was a bit light on policy for him. It was mostly around these terrible attacks, the whole debate fiasco, and between him and Trump. And now that he's won, he still seems to be overshadowed by Trump to a degree. Trump's still holding rallies. He had the big press conference yesterday, bragging about what a great job he did with the vaccine. So, do you see a challenge for Biden? Is Trump going to hang around out there? How are we going to? We can read your book, but how? And that's a great service. But how will the rest of the world find out about Biden if Trump is still hanging around?
Yes, well, of course, this is the fear that Trump will hang around, but he's been singing this song of fraud now for the last couple of months, and it's got to stop. These constant challenges to the very fiber of democracy is sucking the oxygen out of the air, and I felt that. I had to make a decision shortly after the election when I saw that Trump was not going to concede and that this fight was going to go on. I had to make a decision whether to suspend publication of my book until it settled down and perhaps and Biden became inaugurated, or to go ahead and publish now. And I decided to publish now because it would have been self-defeating if I'd held back that book. The book, listen, the world is full of books, and full of ideas. So I'm only one person, and it's only one book, but it is not unimportant for a Canadian, especially with our relationship with the United States, to express views that enrich the atmosphere for multilateral cooperation, and we can talk about Canada in a minute, about enhancing Canada's role. But when I saw the alarm that the Secretary General has been expressing on several occasions, even yesterday, Steve, the Secretary General said conflict, climate change, and COVID-19 have created the greatest humanitarian challenge since the Second World War. And I've been writing in the book about the triple emergency that the world faces, that Biden faces, this triple emergency of climate change, nuclear weapons, and the coronavirus, and how it is upending the world. And so this crisis is the worst, ensemble of crises that we have ever faced, certainly in my lifetime, which is not too far from being a century.
It's really fascinating.
I felt that the book had to go ahead and make at least a small contribution to helping me, and I hope this is directed toward the formation of policy, the Canadian government policy, that the policy in the area, the Canadian government policy in the areas of economic and social development, environmental protection and climate change, arms control and disarmament and nuclear disarmament particularly, and the advancement of human rights, that the Canadian government will seize the opening that is now present as a result of Biden being elected president and being a person who wants to use multilateralism as a key area of cooperation in order to bring countries together. That's a message that cannot be delayed. There is not a moment to lose in helping people to understand not only the gravity of the moment, but the possibilities that Biden presents. So I don't want to talk about Trump in this interview. If you want to talk about Trump, fine, but I don't want to talk about Trump. When I was writing this book, I didn't even tell people I was writing the book because I did not want to engage in conversations with people who would say to me, well, what are you going to do if Biden doesn't win, if Trump loses, if Trump wins the election and Biden loses? And I took the position early on that I absolutely refused to consider the possibility that Biden would lose in order that I could maintain my focus and my energies on getting out the Biden story and what it means for Canada and the world.
Well, I'm with you 100% on that. And of course, we're still watching the drama that's unfolding in terms of the Senate. And I will say Trump one more time. I mean, you said he's got to stop pulling into question the integrity of the electoral system. And in fact, he has Republican members in Georgia right now also asking him that because of the runoffs that have to happen in terms of the Senate. But I want to come back. We're going to talk about Canada. I want to remind people, we're going to do a question and answer in a few minutes. So we have a little button at the bottom of your screen down there. Says Q&A, and I will be monitoring that. So if you want at any point that you feel from this point on, just plunk a question in the Q&A and you can write it there. And then I'm going to ask Doug a little bit more about the three emergencies, and then we're going to talk about Canada, and then we're going to come to the question and answer section of the discussion today. So Doug, you mentioned the triple emergency that Biden is facing. Say a little bit more about that. What do you mean by a triple emergency?
Well, first of all, the climate change, every report that's come out from the panel on climate change of the UN and assorted scientists around the world illustrate the gravity of what the world is going through now in failing to keep emissions under 2.5 degrees rise, and the Paris Agreement is set out to address this. This sort of destruction of various great areas of the planet. We're seeing in forest fires and floods in all manner of the north, the glaciers melting, the seas rising, the impact that is having on coastal areas, the migrations of peoples, the insecurity in great areas. The Syrian war was a product of climate change. All of that is an immensely a turning point for the world, until we got to realize that the question of the climate is not something we consider, well, something 20 years down the line. It is an emergency now. Secondly, the emergency of nuclear weapons. There's still almost 14,000 nuclear weapons, and the negotiations have broken down. The continuation of the modernization process by those states who have nuclear weapons, the amount of money that is spent on nuclear weapons, the amount of political pressure that is exerted by the military-industrial complex for the continued development of nuclear weapons, all of that poses an immense crisis all by itself. And then out of the blue, seemingly, although some scientists did predict there would be pandemics, the coronavirus arrived and took over the world attention. And millions upon millions upon millions of people are suffering. They've lost their jobs, their homes. Many have lost their lives. This pandemic, the worst since the 1918 Spanish flu, and may even exceed it at the rate that the infections are now doubling. And so this has upended our world, and it has caused Secretary General Guterres to plead for a ceasefire in the wars, in the regional wars that are going on, in order to direct the attention and the resources of all the governments on the real war, and that is the war against the coronavirus. And what this has all shown us, the coronavirus, the nuclear, and the climate, is that there is no one simple solution. We have to work together. There has to be cooperation. All these problems jump borders. There's an interlocking of all these problems. It's an immensely complex area, and yet it can be addressed as United Nations has certainly done, and the new Alliance for Multilateralism and various international bodies. It can be addressed by a sense of countries working together for the common good. This phrase, the common good, is not something new. I mean, it's been talked about for a long time, but we have to overcome the streaks of individualism that produced the populism that people are reacting against, the elitism of the so-called established order. It is the institutions that were created after World War II through the United Nations system and the trading and financial systems. Those institutions need to be repaired and advanced, and can only be done so in a cooperative manner. And what the coronavirus especially has shown us is that we must work together. Enter Joe Biden with a message precisely on that line. That's a message that needs to be heard.
And Justin Trudeau. Let's bring Canada in, because Trudeau used his recent speech to the UN General Assembly, calling for greater international cooperation and for reform of many the institutions. He too was kind of hard on the international infrastructure of institutions in dealing with COVID. So, is there a basis for collaboration there? How will the Biden presidency change Canadian foreign policy? What about NATO? Where do you see, or even the trade and energy issue on pipelines, for instance? Where do you see the opportunities presenting themselves?
First of all, long before the election, last June, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau co-chaired with the Prime Minister of Jamaica a new round of meetings of about 50 countries took place. It took part in them to bring together an assessment of renewing and repairing the financial mechanisms, so in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, to give more help to the developing countries that have been especially hard hit by the coronavirus. It was pointed out that all the governments in the world reacting to the coronavirus spent $11 trillion in various programs to help their people. Only $2 trillion of that immense amount of 11 was spent in developing countries. That is to say, the developing countries have been further disadvantaged in their quest for health and education and maternal health, all these issues that are at the root of human security. They have been further disadvantaged. And so Justin Trudeau has stepped up, and I was quite pleased. I mean, I have not been without my criticism of the Canadian government, as readers of the Hill Times know, but I was quite proud that Canada participated in a leading way in the development of new mechanisms, and they had 6 core areas that they examined over a period of time, and the result of this has been to steer more international money into the developing countries. So that's one thing Canada has done. You ask about what Canada will do now that Biden is about to enter the presidency. Well, Biden standing for the multilateralism, for the open cooperation, is singing a Canadian song. Multilateralism has been at the core of Canadian foreign policy for decades. Canadian foreign policy is customarily based on two pillars. First of all, our relationship with the United States for trading and financial purposes, which is well known. And second, our foreign policy was for a long time based on the United Nations and its agencies, because the UN gave Canada an opportunity to express itself in the world. The UN was a medium for extending a Canadian message. And Canada has had messages in the economic and social field and in nuclear disarmament. Pierre Trudeau himself was a leader in trying to get Washington and Moscow to cool down the arms race in the 1980s. The development of the landmines treaty, the development of the International Criminal Court, a leading voice against apartheid in South Africa. Canada participated strongly in these areas. And it's only in the past 10 years or so, but actually was with the arrival of the Harper government in about 2010, that the focus again away from the UN and sort of a diminishment of the UN and the diminishment of international and multilateral subjects began to occur. And Canada stepped back, and we lost the election of 2010 when we were seeking a seat on the Security Council, and they lost again in 2020. So having lost twice in a row in our attempt to get a seat on the Security Council is not a great track record. And so that does reflect what happened in Canada. So I do see Trudeau trying to bring us back more, and certainly in the appointment of Bob Rae, if you judge what governments want to do by the kind of people they put in jobs, then putting Bob Rae in as a Canadian ambassador to the United Nations is a very strong signal to the international community that we want to have an activist approach in the resolution of the problems that cannot be solved by any one nation. And so Canada, with Biden coming into the presidency, Canada has an enlarged door to walk through to play a role as a significant middle power. I have maintained for many years that Canada, as a middle power, has more clout, if you will, more influence in modest terms than it gives itself credit for. So I hope that the Canada will seize the opportunity of Biden. With NATO, it's very difficult, but NATO is an antediluvian institution that has not caught up with the modern world. It should have gone out of existence at the end of the Cold War, and rather than going out of existence as the Warsaw Pact did, it enlarged, and it took in countries that virtually surrounded Russia. And I thought that was, and I'm not the only one. I can show you several political scientists who said the same thing. The enlargement of NATO at the end of the Cold War was the single biggest mistake that was made in the international arena. So we have to deal with NATO as it is. And I'm not advocating that Canada leave NATO. I am advocating that Canada use its influence with countries like Germany and Belgium, particularly, and the Netherlands, that are trying to modernize NATO. And the modernization of NATO would be to reduce and eliminate NATO's dependence on nuclear weapons. NATO maintains a policy of regarding nuclear weapons as a supreme guarantee of our security. It'd be a joke if it wasn't so serious. What outmoded that nuclear weapons cannot give us security for anything. They are the antithesis of security. They are the destruction of security. And so Canada, now that we're facing how we're going to deal with the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is going to enter into force on January 22nd, 2021, we have to figure out how we're going to deal with our allegiance to NATO and our allegiance to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and our recognition of our responsibilities as a very important country to play a role in the development of conditions for peace. And we will never have those conditions fulfilled or a real basis for peace as long as there are nuclear weapons in the world. Canada must realize this. I am not suggesting for 1 minute that Joe Biden is going to become an ardent advocate of nuclear disarmament, but but he has said that he wants, in his direct quote, he wants to play a role in leading the United States toward a nuclear weapons-free world. That is at least a good sense of direction for him to go in, and he needs support in any steps that he feels he could take. And so Canada needs to step up to the plate in this era that we've entered, and Joe Biden gives us the opening.
Well, that's a great challenge for social movements like ours, like the Group of 78, PeaceQuest, and other organizations, to map out where we should be intervening and pushing this government to move, because I'm not entirely sure where Trudeau which opportunity he would take here. It has not been clear where Trudeau wants to go on the international stage. Look, we're going to move to some questions now, Doug. We've got a whole roster of them. I want to tell you lots of high fives in the question area here. Lots of people wanting to make sure that you send copies to Biden, to the Prime Minister. People are offering to help raise money, I think, to make sure we get copies out there, Doug. But I want to give the first question to Roy Culpeper. Roy, what's your take on the situation?
Thank you. As I said in my opening remarks, I think Doug's book is enormously timely, but also enormously useful in infusing our thinking about where we go from here with the Biden administration. I have a worry, though, and I'm sure it's shared by other people, and that relates to our relations with China. As Doug points out in his book, there's much to worry about in China with human rights and so forth. He makes that point very clear. But where I get worried is the saber rattling that I've heard that not only under the Trump administration, but Biden too has expressed his no-nonsense approach, but talk about getting tough with China. And this worries me a lot, because the consequences of any kind of conflict with China would be devastating for all sides. So I'd really appreciate Doug's thoughts on this specific issue relating to China.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you for that. I've been to China several times. It does not make me an expert, but at least it gives me a familiarity with the Chinese government. I've dealt with the Chinese government in modest ways. The first point I would say is we meaning the Western world, we've got to stop. We've got to stop demonizing those we do not like. We've been demonizing Russia, and now we're demonizing China. I do not hold any brief for the human rights violations. I mean, I'm appalled at what they're doing to the Uyghurs in northwest China. But China is there, and we have to deal with them. And thus, I believe that the core of multilateral and even bilateral relationships is dialogue. And the dialogue has to be on mutually respectful terms. And in diplomacy, like you don't need diplomacy if everybody's friendly. You need diplomacy when there are enemies. And thus, we need to extend a better way of dealing with the dilemma that we face in wanting our trade to increase with China, and also getting China to elevate its respect for human rights. But that's the work of diplomacy. And I'll just say one more word about China. It is my view that China, it does not seek a military conquest of the world. And I have several political scientists and authors who share that view, and I could point to. They are strongly influencing the world, particularly through attempting to influence the world even greater through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is sweeping through Africa and the Middle East and so on. The strength and power of China, the economic strength particularly, will overtake the United States. The strength and power of China is going to escalate as the 21st century proceeds. And I don't think there's any denying that. And thus, it is in our interests to hold a dialogue with China that serves Canadian interests that have a duality here in our trade interests and our human rights interests. And diplomacy is all about that balancing act.
Thanks, Roy. Doug, I'll just reading some of the questions here, and I want to encourage people to type their question into the Q&A box right at the bottom. You can just click on that and type your question in there, and we'll pose it to Doug. Doug, you're probably not surprised there are some skeptics in the room today. Some people that want to climb on board the optimist Roche bandwagon, but maybe not. There's some reticence there. Here's a question from Richard. What's your opinion about Biden is suggesting for his cabinet? It says they seem to be hawks. Some connections, weapons companies. I think there's a former Raytheon executive in there. Like, what's your take on? I mean, the devil's in the details, right? And you were writing this book, before these appointments, and now it's starting to unfold a little bit. What's your take on the cabinet?
First of all, on skeptics and my optimism. Steve, all my political life, now going on more than 40 years, I've been looked at by some, not by all, but by some, as sort of an idealist, and to which I have tried to respond that I'll tell you who the idealists are in the world. The idealists are those who think they can keep the war system going, and these disparities between North and South, the developed and developing, you can keep that going, or you can keep going what we're doing to the climate without any repercussions. I mean, those are the idealists who think there's not going to be any huge repercussions as a result of what we've been doing. And the realists are those who recognize that we are on one planet breathing the same air, as John F. Kennedy once said in 1963, and that that our common survival is at stake in the interlocking nature of the global problems that revolve around climate, economic and social development, arms control, and human rights. And so we are living in a globalized world. There's nothing we can do about that. This is the force of technology and the force of history has brought us to this. And so the realists, and I like to include myself in such a category, are those who say we must work together. And so I understand that some people are think this is beyond what we can do, but we have to realize that the pace of events now is such that, as I said earlier, there is not a moment to lose. Bill Gates Foundation, for whom I think a lot of people have some merited respect for what they do on health conditions, they analyze what's happening as a result of the coronavirus in the developing countries, and they said very conclusively in their report that the work of development of the past 25 years has been undone by the past 25 weeks as a result of the devastating nature of coronavirus. So spare me the charge that what I am putting out here is just as optimism, just for the sake of having some hope. Now I want to go for 1 second just to a deeper level on this thing. This is not, the hope that I express is not sort of an empty or a vacuous hope, like I hope it'll be nice weather tomorrow. I can't do anything about it, but I hope it'll be a nice day tomorrow. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about that at all. What I am talking about is what this world has achieved in the past 75 years as a result of the United Nations. We have not had a world war. Now, given what went on in the 20th century, when 100 million people were killed in 2 world wars, let alone a whole bunch of other wars, that is not an inconsiderable achievement. So we have a basis to stand on. Namely, we have avoided a world war. If you go into almost every area of how we any metric of how we measure progress, medicine, industry, technology, science, women's rights. I mean, it is a long list. In every one of these fields, more people are getting more benefits from that field than ever before. That is a very significant progress that has been made as a result of a lot of cooperation and scientific breakthroughs. That gives us a hope. The institutional framework that has been established in the international institutions, whether it's the World Health Organization, the UNESCO, the World Food Organization, I mean, the myriad of spin-off agencies of the United Nations itself that never receive much credit or attention because the world is focused on the confrontation and what I call, sucking the oxygen out on confrontation, and that the creativity that is going on in the world gets less attention. And so my hope, and I rest my case on this, is the evidence, the existential conditions that have been developed as a result of a lot of very smart people putting their talents into these fields that have given us a structure for an improved, elevated civilization. I don't know how you can deny that. Are there wars? Is there poverty? Is there suffering? Of course there is. Is there stupidity? Is there Trumpism? Is there discord? Of course there is. But what about all the things that are happening that don't get reported on CNN because there's no blood on the floor? That's the truth of the matter. And so the rest of us have to wake up and understand the power that we have at this moment in our lives. As Barack Obama said in one of his books, there's never been a better time for a human being to be alive in the whole history of the world, because we have at our disposal the elements of how to build and how to communicate. And my brother, as the scripture says, to love your neighbor as yourself. My neighbor is not the person who lives in the apartment beside me in this building. My neighbor is the woman in Bangladesh, the farmer in Kerala, the teacher in Nigeria, all these people whom I personally have gotten to know in my career. And that's what made me what I am. I do understand that humanity is composed of all these elements that are united, and we achieve our own destiny by outreach and relating to all those aspects of humanity. That gives me hope, because that's now being done.
Well, it's a wonderful challenge to us, Doug. I'm totally with you. Jim Kresge, after he read your book, he wrote in the Hill Times, he said, Roche is certainly an idealist, but his idealism is down to earth, practical. I love that, because I think that sums you up. And certainly your optimism.
Well, I called Joe Biden the pragmatic idealist. He has elements of pragmatism, elements of idealism. So I put it together. I said Joe Biden is a pragmatic idealist. So it's not a bad thing to emulate.
Well, and I think that while you're calling for U.S. leadership in the world, I think some people are pointing out that may not be welcome in all parts of the world. You might ask the people of Iraq whether they enjoyed U.S. leadership in the past 20 years, but I think you've addressed that. I want to come to another issue that has been raised here, and it's about the recovery and the just recovery. And you've called your book Recovery. That's right in the title. And if anyone thinks you're just down to earth, realist, I think your idealism in the book comes through when you talk about military spending, when you talk about the size of the defense budget. And that's a huge issue, tough one, tough nut to crack even here in Canada, when almost pretty much every party is in favor of increased military spending, even the NDP. And so it's been very hard to move that forward. But you take a different position, and it is linked intimately to the recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. The militarization of foreign policy in the United States has been outrageous, and their $740 billion defense budget that just was approved yesterday in the Congress is greater than the next 15 countries spent combined in their spending. It is unbelievable. And why has it gotten to be this way? Because of the military-industrial complex that buys and sells politicians. And there's a coterie of Democrats and Republicans on the Armed Services Committee who work together. And because they agree that they agree that they want more military spending because the military-industrial complex is benefiting from it, and they're benefiting from the military-industrial complex, it is so unbelievably corrupt that what drives this agenda. And then they have the gall to say, well, we still need more money. This military spending is a huge challenge, and the world spending is now $1.9 trillion. And to give you an idea of the disparity between what is spent on war and preparation for war and peace, I just point out that all the programs of the United Nations programs, in all their health and peacekeeping, and every program, I'm not talking about the administration, I'm talking about all the things the United Nations does, is costs about $30 billion a year. So what the countries are putting into the development of peace financially is 2.7% of what countries spend on military. That is unbelievable. And we in Canada ought not to be too smug about this issue. The defense budget of Canada runs around $21 billion. It's slated to go up to 32 billion by 2027. Why such an egregious jump in the military spending of Canada when there is so much needed in terms of money and input into health and education, the sustainable development goals, all those areas that are at the root of security, of finance security. So I have called in the book for a 10% cut in military spending across the world. If there were a 10% cut in military spending, that would amount to $190 billion extra to fight the coronavirus in all the fields and areas that I've been talking about. That would be a much greater contribution to security. In Canada, were we to apply a 10% cut, that would be about $2 to $3 billion, approximately $2 to $3 billion extra. So to those who say, well, this is just dreaming, this is just, pie in the sky, I say, please examine how we get security in the world. Today, we don't get security through arms, nuclear weapons, all these paraphernalia that militarism represents. We get security by human development, by the development of education and health and all the fields that those touch on, maternal health and the application of human rights. Those are the areas that help to build security in the world. And so I would say that the message that Canada should project to meet this triple challenge of our time is to give a new priority to human security spending and downgrade the priority for military spending. So that's a message, and I'm not going to back away from it. I know that there are people in the Ottawa system, and let alone the world system, who are fighting this very much, but fighting to maintain military spending. I think that is the wrong way to go. I've said it in the book, and I think that in the new Biden era, not that he's going to fight the military-industrial complex. I do not expect Joe Biden to fight the military-industrial complex, but I do expect that he will open multilateral channels that will strengthen the development of ideas for common security. So it's in that context that I believe those who want to see the prioritization of financial budgeting in governments improved must now speak out.
Outstanding. I'm with you 100% on that. I think we've we're coming to the end of the questions, Doug. I think you've done a fantastic job of covering them all. Roy, I'm not sure whether you have any other questions that you want to add in or add any announcements before we wrap up. I just want to remind everyone that Doug's book is called Recovery, Peace Prospects in the Biden Era. I think it's, Doug, I want to say it's a wonderful handbook. And if we want Canada to take a leadership on any of these issues, it's up to us to push the government in that direction, because I just don't believe that governments will do it on their own unless they're pressured. So it's up to groups like us to take this opportunity and to move the government and pressure the government to move forward. And your book, Recovery, is a great roadmap. It's a roadmap for us in terms of what's possible. And it's available digital. I know lots of people read it on Kindle. That's one of the systems that it's available on, and you can get a paper copy from Amazon. So, and I think the link was also included in the email that was sent out from Group 78 in the invitation, so you can find it there. And also, you can go to Doug's website, DougRoche.ca, and DouglasRoche.ca, and check out the reviews and all of the other aspects about the book and what people are saying about the book. Thank you very much, Doug.
Thank you, Roy, Steve, and Roy, and all your colleagues and the Group of 78. It's been an honor just to be your guest and to talk seriously, as we have done, about these issues that are at the center of how we're going to continue to live on the planet, and certainly how Canada can make a contribution in a realistic way to a stronger, safer, and more secure world. This is a moment that has come upon us with the election of Biden, spotlighting the possibilities, and I hope that we will all seize this moment and move forward.
Okay, let me bring things to a close. Let me echo what Steve just said about Doug. Thank you, Doug, for your rousing appeal for peace, social justice, and planetary survival. I think, like the subject of your recent book, we should think of you as a pragmatic idealist as well, and I say that as a compliment. Let us hope that the Biden administration lives up to its promises and is not throttled by its opposition inside and outside of Congress, and by the military-industrial complex, for that matter. And hope that the advent of the Biden administration propels Canada back once again, into the international arena to tackle the climate crisis, to energize its support for sustainable development, and to genuinely commit to peace and nuclear disarmament. Thanks again, Steve, for moderating the panel, and thanks to all our participants who joined us. I do have a couple of announcements in closing. This is the last event hosted by the G78 in 2020. Let me express my hope that 2021 will be a better year for us all. And let me mention the first event in the new year for the Group of 78. On January the 13th at 12 o'clock noon Ottawa time, we are hosting a panel on Israel and Palestine, Future Directions in the Middle East, featuring Ala Tautir, Ines Abdelrazak, Shir Hever, and Jeremy Wildman. And on January the 26th, we are hosting a panel featuring Sir Richard Jolly from the UK and Jomo K. Sundaram from Malaysia on relief, recovery, and reshaping the world economy. So please mark your calendars for January the 13th and January the 26th. Have a wonderful holiday season, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you and goodbye.